Government agencies have spent decades quietly researching exactly what belongs in a survival food supply, and almost nobody in the prepper world is actually listening to them. Most people building emergency food supplies take their cues from other preppers online. That makes sense on the surface, but it misses something important. Agencies like FEMA and the USDA have invested serious time and resources studying food safety, long-term storage, and nutritional requirements for emergencies. That research is publicly available, but it just rarely shapes the conversation. Instead, the prepper space gets dominated by content showing expensive bunker setups and freeze-dried meal kits most households cannot realistically afford. After more than a decade of building a real food storage system, one thing has become very clear. The simple, unglamorous foods recommended by government research are almost always the most effective. They work because they are affordable. They last when stored correctly, and they are usually already sitting in a typical kitchen. The current standard recommendation is for households to keep at least 2 weeks of food on hand. That is a significant jump from the older 72-hour guideline, and it reflects disasters where recovery took far longer than anyone expected. 2 weeks is the floor, not the ceiling. Many experts push for 3 months as a more realistic target, and serious long-term planners work toward a full year. Getting there does not require expensive survival kits, but it requires knowing which everyday foods store reliably and deliver real nutrition. Here are 15 of those foods, along with storage tips based on the most common mistakes people make. The first item is honey, and it may genuinely be the most extraordinary food on this entire list. Archaeologists have found sealed jars of honey inside ancient Egyptian tombs over 3,000 years old, and those jars were still safe to eat. That is not folklore, that is chemistry. Honey does not spoil because of its unique physical and chemical properties. Its natural water content stays below roughly 18%, which is too low for most bacteria to survive. It is also highly acidic, creating an environment hostile to most microorganisms. Bees introduce an enzyme during production that can generate tiny amounts of hydrogen peroxide when honey is diluted. What makes honey especially valuable in a survival context is how many different roles it fills. As a sweetener, it is obvious, but it also delivers fast energy because it is essentially simple sugars the body can absorb almost immediately. In an emergency where physical output is higher than normal, rapid energy becomes genuinely important. Honey also has a long documented history as a wound treatment used to reduce infection and support healing. Some medical professionals still use medical-grade honey for burn care today because it can outperform certain synthetic options in specific cases. The biggest storage mistake people make with honey is exposing it to moisture. Honey actively pulls water from surrounding air, and if the moisture content rises above 20%, fermentation can begin. Keep it tightly sealed and away from humid environments. If it crystallizes over time, that is completely normal, and a gentle warm water bath will bring it back to a smooth liquid state. Glass containers are the best long-term option because they are non-reactive and airtight when properly sealed. Both raw and processed honey have an indefinite shelf life when stored correctly, but raw honey preserves more natural enzymes and beneficial compounds. The second item is white rice. This is one of those cases where official guidance and long-term survival logic align in a way that surprises people. Brown rice is genuinely more nutritious with more fiber, B vitamins, and additional minerals because the bran layer is still intact. For everyday eating, brown rice often wins, but that same bran layer contains natural oils that eventually break down and go rancid. Because of that, brown rice has a storage life of around 6 months at room temperature and maybe 18 months if vacuum sealed and frozen. White rice behaves completely differently. Research from institutions like Utah State University Extension has shown that removing oxygen slows oxidation and also prevents insect eggs from hatching over time. The fifth item is oats, which occupy a useful middle ground that's hard to beat. Stored correctly with oxygen absorbers, oats can remain good for up to 30 years. They typically cost around $1 per pound for standard rolled oats, making them one of the most budget-friendly staples available. They also require far less preparation than other grains. Unlike wheat berries, which need to be ground before use, oats are essentially ready as they are. Their nutritional value centers on a type of soluble fiber called beta-glucan, which helps stabilize blood sugar. It also creates a prolonged sense of fullness after eating. In emergency conditions where physical activity increases but overall food intake decreases, steady energy and lasting satiety become critically important. Oats are most associated with breakfast, but they're far more versatile than that. They can be mixed into baked goods or ground into a rough flour for pancakes or simple breads. They can be added to soups as a thickener or combined with honey and dried fruit to make granola bars. Standard rolled oats are the best all-around storage option. They cook faster than steel-cut oats while lasting longer than quick oats, which are processed to the point of becoming mushy. A standard 5-gallon bucket holds around 25 pounds of oats, representing roughly 45,000 calories. That quantity represents a substantial number of meals over time. The sixth item is peanut butter, and this is where calorie density becomes especially important. 2 tablespoons contain roughly 190 calories, mostly from fat and protein. In an emergency, particularly one involving increased physical activity, fat becomes critically valuable as a concentrated energy source. Fat also supports hormone production, vitamin absorption, brain function, and sustained energy output over time. Most emergency staples lean heavily on carbohydrates, so fat helps balance things out and improves endurance. Unopened commercial peanut butter typically lasts 2 to 5 years, depending on formulation. Stabilized versions with added ingredients hold up longer than natural peanut butter, which separates and spoils faster. For long-term storage, the stabilized version is more practical. One of peanut butter's biggest advantages is that it requires nothing to eat. You open the jar and consume it directly. The key storage factor is temperature, because oils can go rancid when exposed to prolonged heat. A cool, dark pantry or cupboard inside the living space is much safer than garages and attics in warm climates. Diversifying fat sources by also including almond butter or sunflower seed butter adds both variety and resilience. The seventh item is canned fish, with tuna and salmon being most common. The core advantage is simple and critically important. Shelf-stable, ready-to-eat protein. Most protein sources do not survive without refrigeration, but canned fish can sit safely on a shelf for 3 to 5 years. Canned fish provides high-quality complete protein alongside beneficial omega-3 fatty acids. A single can of tuna can contain 40 to 50 grams of protein, covering a significant portion of daily needs. It requires no preparation. Open the can and eat it. That is why canned protein is consistently included in official emergency food guidelines. The body cannot maintain muscle mass or proper immune function on carbohydrates alone, so protein is essential. In stressful situations where activity increases while food intake decreases, protein requirements often rise rather than fall. Sardines deserve particular attention because they accumulate far less mercury than larger fish. Their soft, edible bones provide calcium, and they're often available for under 2 pounds per can. Canned fish integrates easily into rice, pasta, crackers, or simple salads, giving it flexibility across meals. The eighth item is powdered milk. It is one of those foods that gets passed over because it does not sound appealing. Fresh milk obviously tastes better, and most people do not imagine relying on a powdered substitute. But from a storage standpoint, powdered milk fills a role that almost nothing else can. Fresh milk requires constant refrigeration and spoils within days. Properly stored powdered milk they can also be mixed into other meals to boost protein content and can replace fresh eggs in nearly any recipe where eggs serve as an ingredient rather than the main feature. Their biggest advantage in emergency meal planning is variety at breakfast. Most long-term storage foods cluster around lunch and dinner options, leaving breakfast repetitive. Eating the same thing every morning wears on people faster than they expect. Powdered eggs make scrambled eggs, pancakes, and egg-based fried rice possible, restoring a meaningful sense of variety and normalcy to daily meals. The 12th item is cornmeal, and its value comes from flexibility and the fact that it represents a completely different grain tradition from wheat-based staples. Cornmeal forms the base for cornbread, which requires no yeast and bakes quickly. It can become polenta, a simple corn porridge that's easily seasoned or enriched. With the right technique, it can be used to make tortillas, corn muffins, and simple pan-cooked flatbreads. It also works as a frying coating, adding texture to other dishes. In terms of storage, Cornmeal doesn't last quite as long as white rice, but stored in airtight containers away from heat and moisture, it holds up for around 2 years. Degerminated cornmeal, which has had the oil-rich portions removed, stores significantly longer than whole grain varieties. What makes cornmeal especially valuable isn't just nutrition, it's variety. Rotating between rice, cornbread, tortillas, and polenta creates a much more natural eating pattern than relying on a single starch. That rotation has a real psychological effect. Meals feel less restrictive and more familiar. Cornmeal also adds a different nutritional profile from wheat. It's naturally gluten-free, contains compounds that support eye health, and contributes a different amino acid balance. While it isn't a complete protein on its own, it helps diversify overall nutrition when paired with other stored foods. The 13th item is dried fruit, which falls into what could be called the morale food category. Morale foods aren't chosen because they're the most calorie-efficient or cost-effective option. Their value comes from how they make long-term emergency eating feel more human and less like pure survival. Dried fruit fills a specific gap that most shelf-stable foods don't address: the craving for something sweet. Whether it's raisins, dried apricots, apples, cranberries, or mango, the specific type matters less than simply having a sweet option available. After weeks of rice, beans, pasta, and canned vegetables, even a small handful of dried fruit can feel like a genuine moment of comfort. That effect shouldn't be dismissed. Preparedness isn't only about surviving worst-case scenarios. It's also about maintaining psychological stability over extended periods of stress. This matters even more for children, who often rely on comfort foods more heavily than adults to feel grounded and secure. Nutritionally, dried fruit provides fiber, vitamins, and fast energy from natural sugars, so it's not simply empty comfort. Most properly dried fruits last 1 to 2 years under good storage conditions, while commercially packaged versions with preservatives hold up longer. The most important factor is keeping them sealed and protected from moisture. Dried fruit also integrates easily into other meals. Mixed into oatmeal, baked into bread, or combined with nuts to make trail mix, it adds both flavor and variety without requiring any special preparation. Now here's something worth pausing on. What separates people who are genuinely prepared from people who just think they are? It's not the most expensive gear or the biggest bunker. It's consistency and knowledge. Knowing which foods to store and why is the foundation everything else gets built on. If this video gave you even 2 or 3 ideas you hadn't considered before, that's real progress. If you found it useful, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content here on my channel, and it takes about 1 second of your time. The most effective emergency food supplies aren't built overnight, but they're also not built from guesswork. They're built from the same simple, reliable foods that agencies and researchers have pointed to for decades. Start there, and everything else gets easier.